the intention of this presentation is to set the tone for the wonderful workshop that will follow right after, so that we don't have to basically explain the basics of what is going to be applicable in Bulgaria and what is already applicable in Bulgaria through the newly adopted legal framework. So that's the intention. I would leave, therefore, the Q&A for after the presentations from the representatives of our financial authority. But of course, if you have some pressing questions, you can already ask them. I will provide you with a QR code at the end. But first of all, what do? I'm part of the European Crypto Initiative. It's an advocacy organization. Basically, we represent the crypto industry in front of EU institutions so that we ensure as much as possible that favorable legal frameworks are created in the EU so that we have a thriving crypto and blockchain ecosystem. So this means that I communicate quite a lot of EU institutions. I communicate, of course, also with the industry, explaining how a specific proposal would affect the day-to-day operations as what is being built. It's a dynamic job. Currently, I'm really happy to be focusing quite a lot on privacy and blockchain, but that's a topic for a different day. But if you want, you can always ask me about privacy. I might not shut up for the next 4 hours. But let's go into the more dry part of this overall workshop, which is what are we even talking about when we talk about legal regulation currently, and particularly the applicable legal framework around licensing, crypto asset service providers, crypto asset services, stable coins, crypto assets other than stable coins and all of that. So it's actually a mixture between 3 main regulations. It's not just MiCA, it's not just the marketing crypto assets regulation, it's also 2 more in this specific law. But of course, if you are running a crypto business, you need to also keep in mind a lot of other frameworks and country-specific frameworks. So speak to lawyers who are handling cases like that. But just so we have this general understanding of even the licensing regime and what would be covered afterwards by the members of the Financial Conduct Authority, there are 3 main legal frameworks currently in this law that is already applicable in Bulgaria. We have MiCA, that is basically, it covers the whole crypto market. How assets are issued, how assets are circulated, and then what happens with those assets, more or less. It's already applicable, and in Bulgaria we already have a law. Then it's the transfer of funds regulation. It's the so-called travel rule shaped up in a legal framework within the EU. We actually went a bit overboard because the travel rule is less harsh than what we then adopted as the transfer funds regulation. Overachievers in the EU, what can I say? But what's important is that there, without any minimum threshold, because there usually is a threshold for fiat, so like normal money transfers, without a minimum threshold, there needs to be some data exchanged between between the originator and beneficiary whenever a transfer occurs, which is specifically important when it comes to unhosted wallets, self-hosted wallets, or just wallets, as we call them in the industry, because there also needs to be some information provided whenever such a wallet is interacting with a crypto asset service provider. But it only applies whenever there is a centralized crypto asset service provider. So no peer-to-peer transfers. So that's number 2. And then the most, I think, underlooked one, which is DORA, Digital Operation Resilience Act, which talks about the infrastructure. Basically, what are we even allowed to use whenever we are interacting with the quote-unquote financial system, financial sector. So it's all about ICT risk management, incident reporting, testing, all of those very technical parts of the job, but also third-party risk, which basically means that you need to be very careful about the third-party service providers you are choosing to use. And this is also part of the broader, okay, how and when and if I'll get a license under MiCA, broadly speaking question. But we have this beautiful law now in Bulgaria. So something interesting about this discussion is going to be, the presentations would follow in Bulgarian, and I will serve as a sort of a nexus, a interpreter if you have any questions that are in English. So don't worry, you would also be able to ask questions, and then we will see how the discussion will go. But intentionally, this presentation is in English so that we set the tone kind of in a unified manner, and then we'll continue in Bulgarian because this also affects mostly Bulgarian companies. But we have now this law, Закон за пазарите на криптоактиви. As I said, in Bulgaria it also covers, it's not just in Bulgaria, but it also covers not just MiCA, but other frameworks. Most importantly, the Transfer of Funds Regulation and DORA. So this is to say that whenever we are talking about a license, we are not just talking about a MiCA license, even though that's the official kind of regulation, legal framework, but we're talking about also the need of compliance with other very important and often even more complicated requirements. So keep that in mind. But now the really important part, and we are slowly moving towards the workshop, but who are the supervisors? So a bit of context, the European Union, by adopting MiCA, it's a regulation, so it's directly applicable. Sorry for the lawyers here, I know you know that, but just so that we are at the same level, directly applicable. However, even though it's a regulation and it's quote unquote directly applicable and it should be applied as it is, no changes, major changes to the text, there is still some opportunity for the member states to make it specific, more tailored towards their system, which in this case means, in the case of MiCA, it means various things, but probably the most important, the most critical is that the member state still has the capacity to choose which would be the national competent authorities dealing with MiCA. So we have two of them, which is not necessarily the case across Europe, where there are predominantly one single national competent authority where all the supervisory and regulatory powers are concentrated. But here we have two of them because of the system system which was in operation even before MiCA. So it had to basically be reopened, and MiCA and all the crypto asset related rules needed to be included in our already applicable system. So we have the Financial Supervision Commission, which is the main supervisory body, but we also have the Bulgarian National Bank, which focuses on the e-money side of it, and the e-money tokens, and also all the payment specifics, which is a very big question currently under MiCA. And I guess if you're operating a CASP, you already have this, at least this burning question, okay, what is happening now that, for example, if I'm dealing with an e-money token, say an USDC, and I'm also a crypto asset service provider, but is that enough? Do I also need to be a payment institution in order for this to happen? Which is the big question currently. There isn't one specific answer. Hopefully there will be soon. Currently the EU is working on that, EU level. But apart from that, it's basically where you can draw the line. E-money, so therefore e-money tokens and payments with them, with funds. And then we have the crypto assets aspect, which is with the Financial Supervision Commission. So this makes it even more important that we actually have representatives from this NCA here with us, which is absolutely unique. And I cannot stop saying this because I truly am very, very impressed that you're here. Thank you once again. And with this, also, now I'm gonna even go into the details that, again, if you're a CASP, which has already which has been operating in Bulgaria for quite some time, you probably know, and this has affected you, the fact that there wasn't a system equivalent to what MiCA now introduces in Bulgaria, which isn't necessarily the case everywhere. For example, in France, there was this really, really complicated system on which basically MiCA is at least partially based. But here in Bulgaria, we didn't have anything about crypto asset services. The only thing was this registration with the National Revenue Agency. And however, what MiCA says in its text is that, okay, if we had any applicable frameworks in the member state that were ahead of the date of MiCA's adoption, then those can basically serve as a basis of some extended period of service provision within that member state under the so-called grandfathering clause. So I have to admit that I wasn't entirely convinced initially that this registration, or not this one in particular, but registrations such as this one, which were basically just this AML Excel sheet, were sufficient to prove this sort of a possibility to continue providing services even after MiCA has been adopted. But what the Commission, the European Commission, did was, because there were quite a lot of questions like that, okay, which systems, because there was quite a big difference between, say, what was in France, what was in Austria, and what was in other countries, such as Bulgaria, for example. But so the Commission was receiving questions, okay, would this registration be enough for a company to still be able to provide services under the grandfathering exemption? And the Commission published a Q&A saying, yes, whatever the system was, it is still would allow for this entity to continue providing services, but only within the same country and only until this period of time that the local law provides. And it does not in any way provide for this passportization of the license, which is perhaps the most important part of MiCA currently, because with one single license, you can provide services across the EU. So, with that being said, basically now the grandfathering clause in our lovely country is the following. The entities registered before the end of last year may continue operating only in Bulgaria, again, until the 1st of July 2026 or until a MiCA license decision, whichever earlier as you can imagine. So this is important because that's literally the last possible deadline. And we are, in a sense, only able to use that because we also had this bit of a delay with the adoption of our local law. And here I know people often ask, what are the financial side? What's the financial side of non-compliance? So here, together with my AI assistant, we created this table, which is obviously based on the regulation, but you can have a sort of a feel of the different breaches and the different seriousness and the amounts. It's in euro, already preparing for next year. But yeah, you can also see basically what is being considered a breach, an offense to MiCA, which is also market abuse with crypto assets, supervision issues. But with the market abuse, there is another discussion that is ongoing, at least from my perspective, is one of the most interesting, which is around MEV and how that is currently scoped within this term. But that's, again, topic for our discussions at some other point. We also have TFR, obviously, particularly when there is this failure for provision of information, which again would be particularly interesting when we're talking about unhosted, self-hosted wallets. But that's already something that there are some technical solutions around. And last but not least, DORA. And here, for me, personally, that's the most interesting part, perhaps because it's the most technical. But how do you handle the governance issues? How do you handle all those topics about related to outsourcing, risk management? Don't forget about DORA, that's what I'm saying. If you take one thing out of this presentation, don't forget about DORA when you are also seeking a MiCA license. And now, so that we slowly go towards the discussion that you have gathered here for, please use this QR code for asking questions to the representatives from the financial, from our NCA, KFN, Комисия за финансов надзор, because what we will ask you to do is to actually save them for after the presentations have ended. And then I will be reading them translating them, but if you can also ask them in Bulgarian, if you are a Bulgarian, that would make it easier, but if you are not a Bulgarian, go on and ask them in English. I will kind of make the, the conversation flow, but please, let's spend a minute on this slide. You scan this code. This would be the way for you to ask questions during the workshop. And with that, I thank you, and I think we can now all move towards the discussion with the NCA. And yeah, we'll all be around. I'll be around until the end of the day. So if you want to discuss privacy, please let me know. I'm dying to do that. And thank you once again.